in the last years of the 1800s and the first years of the 1900s, the United States is going to learn this lesson about imperialism. So, just like the British and French, the United States had taken a country by force. Essentially, they had forced the Spanish to sign over the Philippines. The U.S. had then taken over the politics of the Philippines, installed its military, and used its boots on the ground to start extracting the resources of the Philippines and basically selling American products to the Philippines. And as the United States discovered, Filipinos weren't receptive to this, and we had this U.S.-Philippine war breakout where Emilio Aguinaldo was doing these insurgent attacks on the American military. Although the Americans are going to get the Philippines under control, this is at a high cost. Again, 5,000 or so American soldiers lost their lives in the Philippines, and this is going to be even more spent in money to gain the trust of the Philippine people. And basically, the United States is going to see just what the British and French are experiencing when they take over parts of Africa, parts of Asia, that type of thing. That form of imperialism is costly in lives and money. And Americans in general don't like it because the American public throughout most of the 1800s in principle, although you can argue not in practice, was anti-imperialist. It's not good to suppress another people and then extract their labor and resources for your own benefit. And now they're seeing what happens when you do this in the Philippines. And as a matter of fact, McKinley, when he and Roosevelt are running for the Republican ticket in 1900, they run against William Jennings Bryan, and he brings up this imperialism and says this is costing the American public. This isn't how we're supposed to do things. So they receive a lot of backlash for U.S. actions in the Philippines, saying this isn't the way we do things. But at the same time, McKinley is going to be receiving accolades from the pro-business side of the Republican Party, which is the big part of the Republican Party at this point. Basically, we like that we're now getting cheap stuff from the Philippines, cheap stuff from Hawaii. Now our sugar industry is growing in Hawaii. We really appreciate that. You're opening up new markets for us. You're finding surplus for American goods. This is fantastic. So McKinley's going to be sort of torn late 1800s going into the early 1900s. Getting these overseas footholds creates new markets, and it, in some ways, even if the U.S. doesn't directly control an area, open up the Philippines, open up some markets in Asia. But the thing is, the American public doesn't like soldiers dying, doesn't like this imperialism, at least the imperialism as it's practiced by the British and French. So McKinley's going to start looking at things in a different light. How can we spread American economic and political influence and make the business side of the party happy without making the American public happy? What McKinley is going to start doing, and I should point out this isn't like he's going to sit down in a meeting and write these things down, but the actions he's going to start doing, and we're going to see subsequent presidents sort of adopt from him, is he is going to start adopting this neocolonialist approach, okay, or this informal empire approach to expanding American political and economic interest, okay? So how can we gain more control of the world, sell more of our goods to the world, and get resources cheap from other countries without losing American lives and making the American public unhappy? Well, what McKinley is going to work out, and again, I should point out it's not entirely him, but it starts really under him, is there are other ways of doing this. So if you wanted to get political and economic influence in a country, let's call it made-upia, you want to get political and economic control of made-upia. You want them to buy your goods exclusively or almost exclusively. You wanted them to send the United States their resources cheap, or cheaper than they're going to send them anywhere else. And you want their politicians to listen to you, which the Americans do. Again, it's good for U.S. business. But how can you do this, okay? Well, you tried with the Philippines boots on the ground approach. That results in dead bodies. It results in violence. The American public doesn't like that. how else can we get made up to do what the U.S. wants? Well, these neo-colonial methods that the U.S. is going to employ, they're going to differ from military interventions, economic interventions. One of the things we're going to see the U.S. start doing, and we're going to talk about this shortly, is maybe short military interventions. You don't need to do what you did in the Philippines and completely take it over. What if you go into made up, you remove the leader that's not doing what you want, and then you replace him with a military leader that does what you want. Then you pull the military out before you start seeing an insurgency, something like that. What about, you threaten military intervention? What about made up knows how powerful the U.S. is, and you basically say, if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to remove you. Well, especially if you've done it before, this might work. Maybe just the threat will get this guy to sort of play ball with the United States. Maybe you don't even need a political thing. You just, maybe a U.S. business needs this guy to do something. Maybe that U.S. business can just threaten, if you don't do what I want you to do, the American military is going to step in and support me because I'm an American citizen. So threat of intervention, you could do that. Maybe you're thinking diplomacy. Maybe even before we start to get Machiavellian with things, maybe you made up you just want to treat them nicely. Maybe you just sort of say, hey, we'll give you something good, you give us something good. Again, that might not be the way the U.S. wants to go about things because they want to sort of get a bigger share of pie than other people. But you could use diplomacy to get made up what it wants. You could promise to sell them goods cheaper, lower the tariff on goods to their country to support them, and they're going to support you back. Subterfuge. You don't have to put boots on the ground if you can get somebody in power through other ways. So let's say you've got a democratically elected made up and the politician in charge doesn't want to play ball with the United States. What you could do is you could fund one of his opponents' campaign, make sure that guy gets elected. When that guy gets elected, he's going to give the U.S. what he wants. Maybe the guy running against the guy who you like, he looks like he's going to get elected. Maybe we blackmail him. So the guy we like stays in power. Maybe the guy we like stays in power, but again, maybe he's running against another candidate that we can't blackmail. Maybe we bribe this guy, or maybe we kill him. The United States is going to, at some points, support opposition and directly intervene in foreign affairs. Maybe we could get somebody in power that will play ball with the United States by giving them arms, funding the military to remove that guy there. Again, the U.S. isn't putting boots on the ground, which isn't going to upset the American public, but we maybe lead a coup against a leader that doesn't like the United States. Made up, let's say maybe we don't want to go that far. Made up is not listening to the United States doing what it wants. Maybe we can hurt their economy. Maybe the United States is the prime purchaser of goods for the made up. If we stop purchasing these goods, we put an embargo on their country. Maybe people will rise up, get rid of the leader we don't like, and then we can get the country to do what we want. Maybe we can do kind of what Taft did in the Philippines. Maybe we can just infiltrate a country with goods, American culture, and sort of take the people over that way, get them to sort of agree with the United States by showing the United States can supply cheap goods and sort of get the American principles to support American principles through cultural reasons. So basically what we're going to see McKinley do, and this is going to come into the fallout of what happens in the Philippines. And again, it starts with McKinley, but we're going to see this for plenty of presidents after him, is the United States is going to start moving away from the boots on the ground approach they used from the Spanish-American War and the Philippines War to a more subtle approach at imperialism. Neocolonialism, informal empire, you'll sometimes hear. Basically strong-arm countries into getting to do what you want, or find sort of I don't want to say devious, although a lot of them are devious. Find other ways of doing things, getting countries to do what you want, and finding other ways to open up new markets besides using military power. All right. So what we're going to talk about for the next couple minutes is how the United States is going to expand its political and economic influence without doing this imperialism like it did in the Spanish-American War and the Philippine War. All right, so I'm just going to give you a couple examples. One way that the United States is going to use this, and one example the U.S. will use it, will involve this country right here, China. So China in 1899 was a country with a huge population. So large population today, 1900, I think it's something about 300 million people. A lot of people. Well, a lot of American businesses are going to start looking at China in 1899 because it's suddenly become a lot cheaper to ship American goods to China than it had been previously. So prior to 1898, if you were an American merchant, say John D. Rockefeller, and you wanted to ship petroleum to China, you would have to stop and refuel in Hawaii. You say you're bringing a trade ship. Actually, if you're John D. Rockefeller, maybe you're shipping out of here. You have to go all the way around South America, which is going to take a lot of time. That's going to burn a lot of fuel. You got to refuel in Hawaii. You've got to pay the Republic of Hawaii to refuel there. Then maybe you have to stop in the Philippines, refuel there, which before 1898 was under the control of Spain. That's going to cost money. Well, after 1898, you no longer have to do that because you're stopping at a U.S. port. This is now territory of the United States, so you can just stop, refuel there without charging anything. You can then stop in the Philippines, refuel there, and then you can head to China. So basically, we have these stepping stones that are going to reach these Asian markets. China, at this point, and we'll talk about this more in a second, is not under the control of Britain, France, Russia, at least not in the sense that it's colonized and split up like Africa. As we're about to talk about, there's economic influences, but there's about 300 consumers or 300 million consumers there, and the United States wants a share of this market. Now, the problem for the United States is while China has a lot of people and it's not chopped up like Africa, not completely taken over like Australia, not taken over like the French had taken over Indochina, it's on the verge of being colonized by European powers. So this is basically the United States wanting to sell all these goods to China. It's using the Philippines as a stepping stone to China. Okay, all right. So by 1899, the U.S. is in a position to ship goods to all these consumers. A lot of people that need petroleum to, for kerosene for their lamps, stuff like that. Unfortunately for the United States, while China has not been colonized in the same way that Africa, other parts of Asia have been colonized, it's really close to that. So in 1899, China has basically these zones of influence that are going to be controlled by one European power or another. So what the British had done throughout the 1800s, they'd gone into areas of China, and what they'd done is they had used their money, political power, economic power, to basically almost buy off parts of China. So they would go to areas along certain rivers, pay off officials with money, technology, stuff like that from Britain, and they would take over these chunks of China, and they would basically even land troops to support this area. Officially, this area would still be under Chinese control and still would be subject to the emperor or empress of China, but the British would have a lot of influence in these regions, and they would use this influence to make sure this region only purchased British goods and shipped all its resources to Britain. So in name, it's still part of China. It's not British China or Japanese China. We'll talk about Japan in a little bit here, or German China, or French China, or Russian China. But in reality, these areas are going to be only selling goods to one country and only purchasing goods from one country. And these countries are going to have a lot of political influence in these various areas. So think about it this way. 1899, 1900, China, not colonized, but a lot of people are going to look at it as it's about to be colonized. What had just happened to Africa is about to happen to China. We're going to see these various countries start carving it up. And even though this isn't officially British China, Very soon it will be officially British China. This will be German China. And basically, we'll have this area under European control within a matter of time. So this is the situation when the United States gets the Philippines, gets Hawaii, and now is in a position to get to these Chinese markets. Well, if you're the United States, this isn't something that you want, because if these countries get control of these areas, they're going to close down their ports to American goods. And even if you produce goods better than these countries, more quality goods, cheaper goods, you're not going to be able to sell them to these areas because, again, their ports are going to be closed because they're under control of Germany or Britain or things like that. The U.S. doesn't like this situation, and they're going to like it even less if China gets carved up, because that's going to be no chance to get into the markets of China. So, seeing this situation, the United States in 1899 is going to make an offer to all these various countries. It's basically going to say, guys, instead of carving up China, what we should do is we should open the door to China to all foreign trade. So Britain, give up your influence in your part of China. Germany, give up your influence in your part. Japan, give up your influence. Russia, same thing. And everybody just lets the best goods, the most quality goods, the cheapest goods go to the Chinese market. So everybody, abandon your areas of China, pull your soldiers out, give up your political influence, and let's just open the door to free market in China. U.S. proposes in 1899, right after they've gained the Philippines. Well, what do you think these various countries are going to say when the U.S. proposes this? No, we've got our part. Why would we, if we do the open door policy, we're not only going to have to compete with one another, but we're now going to have to compete with you and your burgeoning industry, and now you can ship cheaper to China than most of us can. So this is just basically going to lose us these markets in China. That's ridiculous. And basically these various powers are going to laugh at the United States when they propose the open door policy in 1899. So U.S. proposes this open door policy. These countries say, no, we're fine. We're just going to carve up China. We already have the influence, and we're just going to make it our own very shortly. Well, something's going to happen in 1899 that's going to get these various powers to change their position on the open door policy and change how they're interacting with China. And this something is going to be called the Boxer Rebellion, all right? So the Boxer Rebellion is going to be a peasant uprising in the countryside of China against foreign influence in China, all right? So basically what had started happening throughout China is the same thing that we saw in other colonized nations. We talked about in the Philippines and Cuba. Basically the Chinese people in British controlled area of China, the native Chinese started to see, as their politicians did whatever the British wanted, they lose economic power, they lose their land to the British, the British make economic gains while the native people lose economic influence, and they start becoming poor, and as the wealth starts to leave towards Britain or Germany or Russia, they started to basically see that they're becoming weaker economically at the expense of these foreigners in these countries. Not only that, but a lot of the poor in China saw these cultural influences brought by these Europeans. Europeans started introducing these goods that the traditional Chinese thought as foreign. They started introducing Christianity, this religion that went against Chinese religious practices. This isn't the way things have traditionally been done. So I want you to think of the average Chinese citizens as sort of being marginalized by these foreign interventions. So what these Chinese peasants will do in 1899 is a number of them will decide to rise up and overthrow and throw out these foreign powers. And this is going to be without the authority of China. So China has an empress at this time in 1899. She's in Beijing. She's basically letting these foreigners do what they want in China, and sort of sitting on the sidelines. She's actually occupying this weird position where she has to appease the foreigners and also appease her native people. But the people of China don't think she's doing enough. So we're going to see these peasants rise up, take up arms with the objective of getting these foreigners out of China. and this Boxer Rebellion is going to emerge. Now, the reason they're going to call this a Boxer Rebellion is because the thing that's going to define the Boxers is they practice this martial art, where they, do punching style things, kicking. And at this point, most Europeans, the only martial art they recognize is boxing. So they see these guys practicing this martial art, and they're going to call them boxers. So Boxer Rebellion. You'll sometimes see these guys called the Society of the Harmonious Fist. So these boxers are going to rise up in 1899, and what they're going to do is they're going to start attacking, beginning in 1899, continuing to 1900, attacking anything foreign owned. So there'll be a British-owned mine in the countryside. They'll attack that. They'll kill the British they come across. Maybe there's a French missionary teaching Christianity in the countryside. They'll attack that. Maybe there's a railroad being set up by a German company in the countryside. They'll go there, rip the tracks up on that, and start attacking these various foreign powers and trying to expel them from the country. Well, at one point, the Boxers are going to march on Beijing, the capital of China. And when they march on Beijing, they're going to surround all of these nations' embassies. So, Beijing being the capital of China, this is where ambassadors from the foreign nations are sent. So, Italy, they have an ambassador there to represent their interests in China. Austria, Hungary, France, Russia, the United States, Netherlands, Germans, things like that, Belgians, they have their ambassadors in Beijing, and they all happen to be in this walled compound called the Foreign Legation. So today you'll see something similar if you go to a capital city of a country. If you go to Washington, you're going to have your Italian embassy. It'll usually be surrounded, and they'll have, maybe restaurants and Italian people where the Italian ambassador can live. They'll have Italian guards. It's just where you get these representations from for these countries staying. Well, the Boxers in 1900 will surround this foreign legation and start laying siege to it. So the various countries inside, they're going to have some guards, the military there to protect the ambassadors. They're going to take positions on the wall to try to defend against the Boxers, and we're going to have basically the Boxers surrounding these various countries' ambassadors in here, and they're going to be here defending this city, defending the ambassadors. But basically it looks like this in summer 1900, when this siege is really going to set in, that they might be able to fight off the Boxers, but the Boxers' numbers are growing and their food supply is running short. So this Boxer rebellion sweeps the countryside of China. Foreigners are being attacked, and this foreign legation has been surrounded by these Boxer troops. Well, how's the U.S. going to deal with this? Because their ambassadors are going to be trapped in here. Some of their military members are here, and they're going to be trapped with these other foreign embassies. Well, what the U.S. will do is it's going to take 5,000 troops stationed in the Philippines, and it's going to temporarily assign them to a multinational coalition that will be formed to rescue this foreign legation. So this multinational army is going to be some 55,000 soldiers. Some are going to be from the British Army, some from the Russian Army, some from Germany, some from Japan, some from Austria-Hungary, and they're going to come together. They actually come under the command of a British general, and they're going to lead this rescue mission of the foreign legation. It's kind of interesting. This is a picture taken from the time. You can sort of figure out where some of these guys are from. I think this guy's either Russian or German. I think this guy might be the American. India was a colony of Britain, but it's also going to receive representation here. Again, I don't know exactly all of them, but these guys are going to come together to form this multinational coalition, and in July and August 1900, they're going to march to relieve the legation. When they invade, I don't know if the exact term to use here, but when they enter China, there's going to be a series of battles against the Boxers. The multinational army will actually lose the first battle, but they're going to win this second battle, and they're going to then enter Beijing. It's actually kind of interesting. When they enter Beijing, they'll be the first foreigners in one part of Beijing that's sort of kept as this area where foreigners aren't allowed. They crawl over the walls there. There'll be a lot of looting, things like that. But they take over Beijing. They're going to relieve the legation, and they're going to free sort of the ambassadors that have been imprisoned by the Boxers. All right, so this is a victory for this multinational coalition. But the thing that's going to be really important about this is what comes after this. So the British, French, Germans, Russians, Japanese are going to look around and they're going to say, all right, so we rescued our ambassadors, but we had to put together this army. We lost a lot of people when the Boxer Rebellion broke out. We're going to keep having to do that if we keep up this spheres of influence in China. We're going to constantly be facing rebellions like this. So we basically have a choice here. We can continue to occupy our zones of influence. Maybe we can even colonize them fully. But if we do that, we're going to constantly have to fight one rebellion or another. Whether it's the Boxers, they may be replaced by a different rebellion. But that's going to continue to happen if we operate the way we're going to operate. So in 1900 and 1901, a lot of these nations are going to look around and say, it's not worth the cost. It's not worth the cost of maintaining our spheres of influence. It would be a lot cheaper if we followed that open door policy the U.S. proposed and just allowed anybody to trade in China, and we basically open the doors to free trade and we make it illegal to have these zones of influence like we had before. So what we'll see is that 1900 and 1901, not really because of anything the U.S. did, but because of what the Boxers did, these various foreign nations will agree to have this open door policy and make China open to free trade. Kind of interesting. China's not really given much of a decision in this, but at the time, China, it doesn't have much control of its own country at this point because of the European colonization or early colonization. But what we'll see is that for the next decades, China will be open to free trade. There's actually going to be an issue in the 1930s. We'll talk about this when a country, Japan, is going to start closing off areas of China again. That's going to cause some issues. But for the next couple decades, China will be open door. And now what this means is that the United States, through diplomacy, has now opened up a new market. Now, they're not going to have the political influence in China, but they didn't have political influence before. They didn't have any economic influence. But now the U.S. is going to start selling its goods to China where it hadn't been selling any goods before. So the U.S. has basically opened a market using methods other than permanent army in a country, other than imperialism as the British and French have done it. All right, so that is the U.S. Entering China. How else will the U.S. Use this sort of neocolonialism to get what it wants? Well, one of these areas that the U.S. is going to use this neocolonialism over and over again is going to be Latin America. So as we talked about before, this area in green had previously been a part of Spain, but following the independence movements, and then U.S. supporting the Cuban Revolution, these areas had gained their independence. Again, most of them in the early 1800s, Cuba late 1800, Puerto Rico late 1800, but then again, Puerto Rico was taken over by the United States. So you had these independent countries, but the problem with these independent countries is, for a lot of different reasons, they hadn't developed, industry of their own. They hadn't developed economically, but they also hadn't been taken over by any European power. In part, they hadn't been taken over because the United States had made this Monroe Doctrine in the 1820s, basically saying to European powers, don't colonize Latin America. If someplace gets its independence, it's going to stay independent. Well, what the U.S. is going to start doing, and especially going to start doing after gaining Cuba and places where it can refuel and basically station military, is it's going to start using these methods to gain greater market share and greater political control in Latin America. And we're really going to start seeing this during McKinley's administration. Again, he starts, but other people are going to continue this. And I think a good place to see U.S.'s neocolonial methods in Latin America is Cuba, all right? So as we talked about, the United States had helped the Cuban people gain independence from Spain. U.S. good guys, Spain's out of here. Now the Cuban people have control of their own country. Well, they're not going to exactly, because 1898, when Cuba gets its independence, the U.S. still has a good chunk of its military in Cuba, and the U.S. is going to insist upon Cuba helping Cuba write its new constitution, its new government. And the U.S., it's not going to take over Cuba because, again, the Teller Amendment said we promise not to do that, but we do want to have a say in your constitution. So what the United States will do with Cuba is basically think about this as U.S. soldiers sitting as these Cuban officials write this constitution. What the U.S. is going to essentially make these Cuban politicians do is give the U.S. All right, we didn't say we take over all of Cuba, but we're going to make you give over this Guantanamo Bay for use as a U.S. military base. This is a condition of us helping your independence. All right, you can understand that. Sure, this is a small price to pay for having our independence. Maybe you can accept that. But here's one of the things the U.S. is going to make sure these Cuban officials sort of go overboard, and you can definitely see these imperialist methods here. U.S. will basically get the Cubans to write in their constitution that the U.S. has the right to overthrow the Cuban government if it does something the United States disagrees with. The U.S. basically makes this newly independent Cuba put that in their constitution. So if the independent government of Cuba does something the U.S. displeases of, the U.S. can intervene in Cuban affairs, essentially overthrow it if they so say. So what this means is that Cuba, yes, you're independent, yes, you can make your day-to-day laws, but if they happen to be in opposition to the United States government, the U.S. can go in and just reset your government, get rid of your politicians, and you agree to that. So think about that as we're not putting additional boots on the ground. The U.S. military isn't going to have to stay in Cuba, but basically Cuba is kind of forced to give the U.S. this sort of opportunity to take it over if they do something to disagree with the United States. So think about that as sort of this neocolonialist method. And this isn't going to be the only way the U.S. is going to get political influence in Cuba, and economic influence in Cuba. Because what we'll see is that right after the independence, the Spanish in Cuba will essentially be forced to sell off their plantations, things like that. Because the Cubans are going to say, if you're Spanish, you got to leave. You got to vacate your political positions. You can't own property in Cuba. And so you have all these Spaniards here that owned all these plantations and land in Cuba. They want to sell. Well, the Cuban people aren't going to be in a position to buy these plantations because they don't have any money. They're at the bottom of this economic ladder. So if the Spanish want to get out of here, they can't own land in Cuba, but the Cubans don't have money. Who might be in a position to buy the big businesses in Cuba? American merchants. And what we'll see immediately after independence is Americans are going to move in, start running these plantations, start buying these businesses, and for a while Cuba's essentially going to become the Vegas before Vegas, where Americans are going to come down and sort of be in this vacation spot. They're going to start running the plantations instead of the Spaniards, and instead of the Spaniards being the one to profit off the labor of the Cubans, it's going to be American business interests at this point. So Cuba gets its independence. They're going to be able to make decisions day to day, but if they do something U.S. disagrees with, the U.S. can intervene and replace the Cuban government. And that'll actually happen on a couple occasions where the U.S. will send soldiers down and the Cuban government will have to either rescind what they're about to do, or the U.S. government will replace them, and the U.S. will be able to cite, well, hey, we have permission to do this. And so now you have Cuba, now independent of Spain, but kind of politically attached to the United States, and a lot of its businesses are now owned by the United States instead of the Spanish. All right, so this is one way the U.S. is going to use neocolonialism in Latin America, and I'm just going to give a couple examples of this. Another way the U.S. is going to give sort of get what they want in Latin America will involve this little strip of land right here, this Isthmus of Panama, which the U.S. is going to decide in 1899 that they want to build a canal in this area, okay? So the United States now getting new markets in Asia, now got the Philippines and Hawaii. U.S. has its naval fleet up here. U.S. businesses want to get to these new places in the Pacific, But the problem is, in order to get there, you've got to go all the way around South America. That's like a 2-month journey. Wouldn't it be a lot nicer if we could just build a canal and get our goods from the East Coast, where most of them are produced in the United States, through this canal, and then cut out that 2-month journey around South America? We'd make a heck of a lot more money. So when the U.S. is going to first come up with this idea to build this canal here, this is not Panama. Panama didn't exist. So today this is a country of Panama, is where the Panama Canal is located, but obviously the canal doesn't exist. The country of Panama didn't exist. This area right here was a part of Colombia. So Colombia right here, and it extended all the way out here. There was no Panama. Well, in 1899, McKinley is going to propose to Colombia, if you will allow us, we'll give you some money. We would like to build a canal through your country, and we want to run this canal, and we basically want, we'll pay to build it, we'll supply the technology, and we'll pay you money to do it, but we want to send our ships through, and so can we do this? Well, initially, Colombia is going to be open to the idea. Colombia will say, sure, we can start talking about it, and they'll start working on a treaty with the United States over this proposed canal. Now, there's going to be some fluctuations over the coming years, but 1901, 1902, the United States is going to start proposing things that Colombia doesn't agree with. Like, one of the things the U.S. will say is that we want to make it to where essentially this zone that's going to control the canal will be occupied by the U.S., almost treated like U.S. territory, and the U.S. can control who can go through the canal. If we're at war with Britain or France or something like that, we want to make sure their ships can't go through. So initially it was, we'll build this canal through, we'll collect a little bit of money from the canal, people going through the canal, Americans will be going through this thing. But then the U.S. starts saying, we also want to be able to control who can use the canal. Well, Colombia doesn't necessarily like that, and 1901, 1902 talks about the U.S. building this canal will break down. And Colombia is not only going to do that, but they'll actually start talking to Britain and France to see if they want to be the ones that will fund the canal. And basically they start saying, hey, you can be the one to build this thing, you know, as long as you let us run it and things like that. But you guys are going to be the head of the canal, not the United States. Well, the U.S. is going to hear about this, and what they're going to do is they're going to employ this sort of neocolonialist method to get what they want that, as we're going to see, is going to be Colombia is not going to like. So what's going to happen is basically the United States will support this group in Panama that is pushing for this region here to be independent of Colombia. Now, this independence movement in Panama is incredibly small before the U.S. starts supporting it. Just a tiny group of people that think this Panama area should be independent of Colombia. But the U.S. learns about it, and after Colombia starts disagreeing with them, they start funding money to this independence movement. And with the American funding, the independence movement's going to start growing bigger. And what we'll see is eventually these pro-independence guys will get big enough to where they're going to end up declaring independence from Colombia. Okay, so they declare independence from Colombia. They're going to take over Panama City, and they're going to say now Panama is independent of Colombia. Okay, so the U.S. funds this independence movement. They declare it, and now they say we're independent of Colombia. Well, here's the thing. Colombia could easily put down this independence movement because it's even with U.S. support, it's not that big. So Colombia is going to start assembling its military, and it's hard to travel through this region. So they're basically going to send their military by boat to put down the independence movement. But right after it's declared, and this is actually within 3 hours of the people taking over Panama City and declaring independence, within 3 hours, the United States will recognize Panama as independent and basically sign a treaty saying we are allies with newly independent Panama. And when Colombia tries to end the independence movement, U.S. naval ships will block Colombia from getting its troops to Panama City, allowing the independence government to take over. And once the independence government takes over, its first action is going to be to allow the United States to build the canal under U.S. conditions. So U.S., you can control the canal, you can permit whoever you want to go through it. So what the U.S. basically does is it creates the nation of Panama so it can get this canal through. Did it have to put boots on the ground? It didn't. It basically just stopped Colombian troops from getting there to suppress the independence movement. It funded an independence movement, and the U.S. got what it wanted politically without having to do what it did in the Philippines, without having to do what the British and French do with their thing. And so within a couple hours, within 3 hours, they recognized Panamanian independence. You compare that to what we're going to see later. The Russian Revolution will happen in 1917. U.S. won't recognize the USSR until 1934. So it took 17 years for that, but it's only going to take 3 hours to recognize Panamanian independence. This isn't going to be the only thing the U.S. is going to do. What we'll see in other countries in Latin America, so the U.S. starts construction of the Panama Canal. It'll be finished shortly thereafter. U.S. is also going to start these sort of neocolonialist methods here in Guatemala and Honduras. And sometimes the U.S. is going to do things, and it won't be the U.S. government doing it. U.S. businesses will actually start using neocolonialist methods. So we're going to very briefly talk about what happens in Guatemala. Guatemala is a very poor Central American country. Very poor meaning that, there's not a lot of infrastructure there. The people there incredibly poor, not a lot of exports out of the country. But a particular U.S. business called United Fruit. United Fruit is a company that's going to be formed in 1899. It's merged from two greater U.S. fruit companies. Basically, they're looking at U.S. greater control, U.S. now influencing in Cuba, and they're going to determine that, hey, shipping costs are going to be so cheap that we can start growing fruit in places like Guatemala and Honduras, shipping them to the United States, and we can make a substantial profit from it. So in 1899, this United Fruit Company will go to Guatemala, and United Fruit, because it's a major company, it's merging of two major fruit companies, it's got a ton of expendable capital. It's actually got more expendable capital than countries like Guatemala do. Like a U.S. company has more money than an entire country. So what United Fruit will do is it's going to start using this money to purchase a significant amount of land in these countries. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about Honduras. But what United Fruit will do in Guatemala is it's going to start building a railroad and infrastructure across Guatemala. And Guatemalan politicians are going to approve of this because their country needs to grow. They need railroads. And so they allow United Fruit to do that. But the problem is that United Fruit, once you build these railroads and the economy becomes dependent on it, if United Fruit doesn't like what you're doing, you can basically cut off the economy. And we'll see this happen in Guatemala is United Fruit builds this railroad. They're also going to control the postal service for a while. And if politicians in Guatemala don't do what they want, they'll basically shut down the economy and say, do what we want, or the economy is going to be ruined. United Fruit will actually get to the point where they're going to find a politician. You don't need to know about the guy's name, a guy named Cabrera, but he's going to take over Guatemala. United Fruit likes him because he allows United Fruit to do whatever they want as far as economy-wise. So to ensure that Cabrera stays in power, they're going to continue to fund his campaigns. So whenever a re-election will come up, they're going to make sure that they put funding up so people are going to vote for him. Cabrera is going to thank them by allowing United Fruit to have tax-exempt status, import-export free duties. Cabrera will stay in power from 1898 to 1920 because United Fruit supports him. Basically, the only way he's going to be removed is a coup will emerge in 1920, overthrow Cabrera, kick him out because he's too friendly to United Fruit. But in 1921, United Fruit will fund a counter coup that's going to overthrow the guy put in by the people of Guatemala, and they're going to reinstall a different guy that's going to be friendly to United Fruit. So by controlling the infrastructure, a U.S. business controls this entire country. Similar story in Guatemala. And by the way, you're going to see reference to these countries as banana republics because one of the main fruit the United Fruit's going to be growing in these is bananas. So people call them banana republics because they're republics, but really they're being controlled by these banana companies. Very similar story in Honduras, essentially a poor Central American nation. United Fruit comes in, more wealth than just about everybody in Honduras combined. So United Fruit sees potential to grow fruit throughout Honduras. It's going to buy a substantial amount of land in Honduras. A lot of this land isn't owned by anybody, or it's owned by people, but not actually the people live on it who live on it. Honduras is filled with a lot of Indian inhabitants, people that had lived on the land since even before Europeans arrived. Their families had just lived there for centuries, and they never had title to the land because nobody ever challenged their claim to the land. And again, even when the Spanish came in, they weren't making claims on the land. So this is my land because this is where my family lived. Well, United Fruit comes in. You don't have title to your land. They're going to have United Fruit companies that will then allow them to buy up this land from these people. Again, not even buying it from the people because the people don't have title to the land, so United Fruit won't pay them. And United Fruit's actually going to purchase about 50% of the land in Honduras. So half a country United Fruit will take over. And see, the thing is, they're not even going to plant fruit on most of this land. They'll just plant fruit on some of it, and they'll displace the population on other parts of it. And they'll basically tell the population to leave. So imagine, again, your family's lived there centuries. Somebody buys the land, says you can no longer live here. They kick you out, and they don't even use the land. Well, this obviously is going to lead to unrest, as these landless peasants will occasionally attack United Fruit. Well, this is going to be sort of another neocolonialist method, because when this happens, what United Fruit will then do is it's going to protest to the U.S. government and say American citizens are being attacked, American businesses are being attacked. The U.S. government will then send soldiers down to support United Fruit. So in actually 1903, 1907, 1911, 1912, 1919, 1924, 1925, and what would that be? 7 different incidents. The U.S. will come down here and prevent United Fruit from being forcefully thrown out of Honduras. Again, the U.S. is only going to send soldiers for a brief amount of time to put down a revolt. They're not occupying the country long term, but we have United Fruit has now basically gained control of the economy of a country, without having to put boots on the ground. So this is another neocolonialist methods. So the U.S. will continue to do this not just in Central America, but throughout Latin America. We'll talk about it a little bit more with Mexico. And through this methodology, the U.S. is going to expand its market significantly, and we're going to see this Western Hemisphere basically come under U.S. control. Now, some parts of South America will remain fairly independent, but the U.S. essentially puts its stamp on these areas, gains political control of these Latin American countries, and gains economic control of these Latin American countries to a substantial degree. So this all happens under McKinley. Sort of, this is a cartoon, depicting that the U.S. bringing these countries under U.S. Influence. This is a very, it doesn't have nearly as many of the interventions the U.S. actually does in Latin America, but this is a sort of shorter version of how the U.S. has controlled Latin America, the various interventions from late 1800s to the early 1900s in Latin America. And again, most of these are just going to be on a temporary basis. So if you're a businessman in the United States, you love this. You love this change because you've got new markets, you've got new resources coming in from these countries very cheaply, you have new places to refuel your shipping vessels. This is really good. To a lot of people, what McKinley is doing is great. They love it. They love that the U.S. economy is growing, and it's essentially doing what Britain does in a cheaper way than Britain is doing it. Maybe you don't have full political control, full economic control like Britain does of these various African colonies, but you have almost as much control with not as much effort, with not as much military work, not a lot of Americans dying. So a lot of American pro-business people are giving thumbs up to McKinley. A lot of Republicans like what he's doing. Now, some people are going to see what McKinley's doing and they hate it. Okay? Some people see what McKinley's doing and they basically see this as this capitalist, not necessarily plot, but sort of the expansion of capitalism. And a lot of people are basically going to tie in this U.S. sort of globalism or expansion of capitalism, imperialism, they're basically going to put this as capitalism run amok. And they're going to see things as this is going to be a broader fight for the people against these moneyed interests. And some people are going to tie this directly to the stuff we saw in the Gilded Age, the marginalization of the worker and things like that. One of the persons that believes this in this sort of version of things is this guy right here. His name is Leon Czolgosz. You'll sometimes see his last name spelled differently. It's a Polish name. Leon Czolgosz was born to some Polish immigrants that had moved to the American Midwest to escape some violence in Poland. When they moved to the American Midwest, they're going to take a job in a factory, and they're going to experience what other Gilded Age workers, industrial workers experienced. They're going to start seeing their work hours going up, their wages going down. And as years and years go by, they're not going to be able to afford to live in their own apartment. They're going to have to live with other families. Food on the table is going to become more scarce. And things are going to become so problematic for Leon Czolgosz's family that eventually they're going to have to send Leon to work in a factory himself. At a very young age, the family's going to decide, you can't get an education, we need you to bring in a paycheck. He goes to work, and this essentially means Leon is not going to be able to do much more than become a factory worker. He knows how to read and write, but without a proper education, his prospects are limited. Well, when Leon goes to work in a factory, he's going to see the conditions that his parents have been facing for years. He's going to be forced to work under horrendous working conditions, poor labor conditions. Safety is not going to be a concern. He's going to see people losing limbs. He's going to see people die in these various factories. He's going to be working all hours of the day, barely making enough to put food on the table. Even when he becomes an adult, he's still not making very much money. Like other workers, Leon Czolgosz saw the solution in a union, but like other workers, he saw that unions rarely are able to win disputes with owners. As a matter of fact, Leon Czolgosz, during one strike, he and his union members lined up outside a factory, arm in arm, to prevent replacement workers from getting in. The factory owner hired Pinkertons to break the strike, and what the Pinkertons are going to do is they're going to go to the strike line. They're going to try to break through right between Leon Czolgosz and a very good friend of his who are locked arm in arm. They're going to push back against the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons, claiming self-defense, will start hitting Leon Czolgosz with sticks, start beating him, and as he falls to the ground, he's going to watch and see a Pinkerton basically beat his friend's head in, killing him. Leon Czolgosz, if you can imagine an image like that, he's going to think this is a war. This is basically somebody murdering somebody for standing up to their beliefs. Well, and trying to get better working conditions. Well, to Leon, he basically thinks that this is also proof that this is capitalism run amok. And again, as we're going to see, he's going to tie this to this imperialism as well. So Leon will start reading socialist literature. He's going to start, the descriptions of him is that he would sit in bars at night, not drinking beer or anything, drinking milk, reading socialist newspapers. Eventually, he's going to get to the point where even socialism, nationalization of industries, he doesn't even think that'll work. He thinks that capitalism and politics are too tied together for that to work. So he starts believing in this anarcho-communism. And as a matter of fact, in the late 1800s, he'll start attending events where this Emma Goldman, this woman, this communist anarchist woman, will start encouraging people to take violent actions to end capitalism and end the American political system, or the political system that has allowed capitalists to sort of gain control of it. So Leon will start following Emma Goldman around, start attending these events where she makes these speeches. And at these speeches, she's not only going to speak out for workers, but she's also going to start speaking out against American imperialism, expansion of this capitalism to these other overseas countries. And basically, sort of the impression she's going to give Czolgosz is, first it's happening in the United States, take over the Philippines, it's going to happen in the Philippines, and it's going to happen in China. And basically, the world's going to come under the control of these capitalists, and all the wealth is going to be funneled into the hands of these handful of fat cats. Again, there's not a whole heck of a lot of communist anarchists in the United States, but some guys like Czolgosz are truly going to believe in messages like that. So Solgos gets really hopped up on this anti-imperialism, this anti-capitalism message, and he basically adopts the edicts of anarcho-communism. Well, one of the things Emma Goldman would preach is propaganda of the deed. She would say that you spread the anarchist communist message by committing acts of violence, and she would even propose, she's later going to sort of downplay this, but committing acts of violence that bring attention to the cause. Even if it's negative attention, any attention's good. And Leon is going to see this, an example of this, when he, in 1900, an Italian communist will assassinate the prime minister of Italy. He shoots the prime minister of Italy, becomes headlines throughout the world, and basically Solgo says this is another communist anarchist that has taken this message to the public. So Solgos is going to determine that he is going to execute this propaganda of the deed by executing the President of the United States, William McKinley. So he comes to this decision. Again, he comes to this decision to expand communist anarchism, but he doesn't really think beyond what's going to happen after I execute McKinley. He basically says, I'm doing it because he's represented the capitalist interests. I don't know what's going to happen after this, but he's just sort of fed up in his mind, so he determines that he's going to do this for this communist anarchist movement. He's not doing it like Charles Guiteau, and that Charles Guiteau sort of insane, made up fake relationships. Solgos is doing it because he has a vision in his mind, but he's not thinking very far ahead. So Solgos will purchase a small snub-nosed pistol, and he's going to start reading newspapers to learn where William McKinley's going to be. He's going to decide to do this in 1901, and he's going to read that on September 6, 1901, William McKinley will be visiting a technology fair in Buffalo, New York. So as we talked about before, whenever new technologies come out, there's no internet, no TV, radios aren't really commercially available yet. So if you want to get a message out, you set up exhibits at these technology fairs. People exhibit it and look at the technologies. Investors purchase them, things like that. So this is where you go to show off your stuff. I don't know if Edison or Tesla are at this fair or anything like that, but this is the type of place they would be. And McKinley, being the President of the United States, one to encourage the economy, is going to visit it just to look at the exhibits on September 6, 1901. So McKinley is going to head to Buffalo, New York, and so is Leon Solgos. Well, McKinley is going to go to one of these exposition halls, and he's going to start shaking the hands of people, just sort of greeting people, I'm the president, and a line is going to form of followers of the president, people that want to meet the president. People go up, shake their hands, say, thank you, Mr. President, things like that. Well, followers keep coming up, Solgos is going to get in line, and he's going to wrap his hand, before he goes up to get in line, he's going to wrap his hand and the pistol inside of it in a bandage to where it looks like he's had a hand injury. Now, this is pretty common in industrial, Gilded Age America for people to have hand injuries, so nobody's going to think anything of it. And again, he's got an incredibly small pistol, so it's not like, people aren't suspecting there's a gun in there. Well, McKinley's shaking hands. Solgos is going to get up to McKinley, and when it looks like he's going to shake McKinley's hand, he's going to reach his hand into McKinley's stomach, fire 2 bullets, and these bullets are going to go and embed themselves in McKinley's torso. Well, obviously people are going to wrestle down Solgos. They actually almost beat him to death. McKinley, he actually stays standing. He's going to say, don't kill the man. We need to learn what he's done this for. But McKinley is going to go off to get medical help, and they're going to start calling for surgeons. Buffalo is a fairly big city, but at the time there's only 4 qualified surgeons in Buffalo. 3 of the 4 happen to be out of town at the time. The only one that's actually in town is a gynecologist. So they call this gynecologist over to investigate McKinley's bullet wounds. The gynecologist will look at McKinley's wounds, and he's going to determine, I don't think anything vital was hit. I'm going to go ahead and just sew him up. I think I don't think the bullet hit anything vital, so we'll just sew him up. Now, I don't know this for sure. I suspect that guy was thinking about what happened with Garfield and is going to make the decision because of that, because he doesn't want to be the guy that gives the president an infection. Well, unfortunately for McKinley, vital stuff had been hit. A bullet had gone into his stomach. It was leaking stomach acid throughout his abdomen. McKinley doesn't notice, and as a matter of fact, after getting shot on the 6th, he's going to spend the next week regaining his health back. He's going to start walking at one point, eating food, and it's looking like the doctor was right, but the whole time this sepsis is going to be occurring in the stomach, and he actually gets gangrene of the torso, which is a thing I didn't even know you could get. But September 13th, after getting up and looking healthy, he starts to feel ill, and he's going to collapse, and he's going to die of this gunshot wound. So again, we have another president who's been assassinated. Well, we won't talk about what happened with Solgos. He's going to be convicted of murder. They're going to ask if he feels remorse. He basically says no, he did this because he felt it was what was right, and he's going to be executed in an Edison-crafted electric chair on October 29th, 1901. So very quick trial because he admitted his guilt. All right, so McKinley's now been shot. What does this mean? Why is this important? Well, Solgos, when he planned this, he really didn't know what was going to happen from it, but he thought this would somehow serve the greatest communist anarchist movement. He's going to be wrong about that, because what happens immediately is a lot of communist anarchists see this and they say, this isn't the right way to go about things. If this is what we're doing to get our message out there, then I don't want any part of it. And you'll see a lot of communist anarchists defect from the movement and basically leave. That's what's going to happen to a lot of them. Other communist anarchists are going to start being infiltrated by the American government. They're going to start leading this major investigation of it, start getting people that were once in the movement, don't like it anymore, to testify against their friends. And we'll see for a time this communist anarchist movement will essentially die out within the United States. Emma Goldman is going to face charges. Similar people will either be forced to leave the United States, go to jail, and its leaders will be basically broken up. Now, Socialist Party is still going to be there, but this extreme end of the communist anarchists, this communist anarchist movement, will essentially go away. So Solgos doesn't get what he wants. As a matter of fact, he hurts the movement significantly by assassinating McKinley. Another thing that's going to end up coming out of this is going to be that even though Solgos doesn't accomplish what he wanted to, in a way he actually is going to end up helping workers, because when McKinley dies, he's going to be replaced by this guy, Teddy Roosevelt. Now, as we talked about before, Teddy Roosevelt, this hero of the Spanish-American War, he was stuck on McKinley's ticket, not because he was a pro-business Republican, because he agreed with McKinley, but because he was a reform-minded Republican, and the rest of the Republican party kind of want to keep his mouth shut. And as we're going to see, Roosevelt, when he becomes president, he's actually going to start helping workers, and he's going to start doing reforms that other pro-business Republicans won't like. And we're going to talk about that next time. One final thing about the assassination of William McKinley. This guy right here was present at the assassination. This guy's Robert Todd Lincoln, son of Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln, when he was assassinated, Robert Todd was not in the booth with him, but he was in town when he was assassinated. Now he was present at the McKinley assassination. He was right there when Solgos shot him. Not only was he present at McKinley's assassination, he was actually also present when Garfield got assassinated in '81. So he was in town for his father's assassination. He was there when Garfield got assassinated. Now he was there when McKinley gets assassinated. Some people in the Republican Party want Lincoln to run for president in a future election. Lincoln's basically going to say, hell no, I'm not going to be president. I see what happens there. So anyway, that's a sort of a side note about this McKinley assassination.